Well, what do we think? You got 7 minutes after.
Sure.
I'm good to go if you guys are.
Yeah.
Go ahead and start?
Let's just go. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Right. Well, first off, thanks for coming to hear my presentation. My name is Erik Andresen, and I am part of the Morningstar Company, which is a food company. I'll give you some of the history and some of the baseball card numbers on Morningstar in just a second. And today I'm here presenting on behalf of our SelfManagement Institute, which is an internal group that was set up in 2006 to kind of advance our organizational philosophy that we call self-management. So today, and we've only got a short period of time, new colleague orientation on self-management generally takes a full day at least. When we do seminars for outsiders, they will often be 2 or 3 days long. So we're going to try and hopefully not give you a full, all-encompassing view of self-management, but hopefully just enough to spark a little interest, and I'll have some resources for you at the very end. So the Morningstar Company was founded in the 1970s, and it was a trucking company. Our founder was a one-truck owner-operator hauling tomatoes from the field to the factories. And he's continued to grow the organization, and at this point now, we have the 3 largest tomato processing factories in the world. We still have the trucking company as well, so we're hauling all of our fruit from the field to the plant. We have a grower services division now as well that provides harvesting and transplanting services to the growers that we contract with. And then we've now also started farming for ourselves. We have about 12,000 acres, more or less, of ground that we're working now, and we're hoping to expand that significantly over the next few years. So there's just a little snapshot as far as some of our. This is in California, yes. We have 2 of our plants are in Merced County, in the Central Valley, and then we have 1 in Colusa County as well. So kind of all along the I-5 corridor there. We produce over 1 billion pounds of tomato paste every year, and about 320 million pounds of diced tomatoes. We've gone from from owner-operator to about 300 year-round colleagues today. And then we bring on another 2,000, 2,100 or so during the season, which runs generally from July to October. And in fact, the season, I think the plants are doing their final run today, and then they're going to shut down and be winterized and all of that. So self-management is how we've run our operation. It's been our practice for over 20 years now. And very simply, it means that we don't have a traditional management structure within the organization. We don't have managers. So before we jump in, and presenting this at Libertopia, you guys are going to feel like you kind of came home because you're already going to be bought into a lot of the ideas that I'm going to throw out. But this is how oftentimes we'll start with just a very simple question. There's only 4 of you here, so you got to yell it out for me. You can't rely on everyone else to do it. So, what color is a yield sign?
Yellow.
Yellow. Yellow. Yellow. It's actually red and white. And they have been for quite some time. Now, a colleague of mine likes to throw this question in there, so I borrowed that from him. And he does it to demonstrate that the mind is an amazing thing, and yet sometimes we will have these associations in our mind, these things that we know, and then they turn out to be wrong. And this, I'm sure, doesn't surprise any of you, because I'm sure you've met plenty of people who will tell you that they know that something that is absolutely coercive, and it can be demonstrated to be coercive, is voluntary at the same time, right? So that's kind of why we throw this out there. So hopefully we can talk a little bit in terms of the way that human beings interact and what the best ways for them to interact are going to be. So to start that discussion, we have to look at principles. So we fully believe that the principles of self-management and total responsibility that underlie all of our family and our community relationships are also the best ones to organize our commercial relationships. So essentially, we all abide by certain principles in our daily lives. We don't leave them at home when we go out into public. Sometimes we know people who leave them behind when they step in a voting booth, but hopefully we can apply these in all of our commercial endeavors as well. So you guys will probably really like this one here. Like in any other aspect of your life, we can benefit if we abide by two fundamental principles. And the first one is we shouldn't use force against other people. Is there any disagreement here at Libertopia? Because you might be in the wrong spot if you are.
Well, let's disagree just for the hell of it.
Okay, great.
Not a disagreement, but there are some situations where you have question and answer sessions in the end, self-relate because it's a bit long. There's some short version is there's some gray areas where you ask, is it force or not?
True. And there are lots of debates about that. So we can get into that maybe in the Q&A portion. Because when we say force, we're not talking about at work, we hope, actually somebody initiating physical force against us. So we use this to refer more to coercion, and this translates in our environment to no single individual having command authority. There is no authority to fire within our organization. So no one person will be able to exert what we generally would think of as managerial authority over another person. And that has quite a few implications, as you might imagine. So if you do have short questions or you want me to clarify anything as we go, feel free to throw something out there. This is our second foundational principle, that people should do everything that they agree to do. So if the first one forms the basis of criminal law, this one would form the basis of civil law, contract law. So if you make a commitment, you need to honor that, you need to keep it. And so in our environment, this becomes integral, especially if I cannot say, Jim, you need to do this because I told you to and because I'm the boss. We definitely rely on people who are going, on finding people who are going to keep their commitments. And these commitments are voluntary. Rather than having a boss, we have a personal commercial mission, which we agree to at the time of hire. Now, it might change over time, but we have to consent to it. And then, since no man is an island, we're all going to accomplish more if we work together. That's why we come together to form associations in the first place. We're going to make commitments to one another, and those commitments do need to be voluntary if everyone's going to be completely bought into them, and if they're going to work together. So now that we have those principles in order, let's talk a little bit about the philosophy. So that brings us to what is an organization. Again, this group, you guys are already well down the path of self-management because you're already aware that terms like organization, society, government, these are just abstractions. They're concepts that we use, they're tools. The only reality that we have are individuals. So we turn to talking about organizations and philosophy. Do all organizations have a philosophy? I would argue that they do, or at least something that approximates one. Ayn Rand, in Philosophy, Who Needs It, talked about, or she asked the question if you have a truly rational, well thought out philosophy, or if it's kind of a mongrel philosophy that's cobbled together from all of your associations and things like that, that you know to be true, but may not be. So what is an organization? Again, this is, I'm getting a little too ahead of myself there. So the purpose of an organization, people to come together and accomplish more together than they would individually. So if people, the individuals, are the only reality, then they are truly the most important piece of it, and we should acknowledge that. And an individual whose fundamental mission is to be happy is going to associate with us at Morningstar to better fulfill their own personal happiness, and our goals ought to reflect that as well. So are the organizational goals, are they always aligned? Are there times when a company's goals, particularly in a traditionally managed organization, can become superordinate? They can become more important than the goals of the individuals who make up the organization and its stakeholders. I would say that there are times when that does happen. I feel like I've worked for companies where that was the case. Does anyone agree with that? Anyone disagree with that? Let's see one. So what happens when that's the case, when the goals of the organization are no longer aligned with the goals of the individuals who make it up? Now, are the individuals being asked to sublimate their own goals? Or are they being asked to sacrifice their happiness for the good of others? And at that point, do they begin to disengage from the organization, where you feel like your goals, your happiness is not important? I have certainly been in organizations where I felt like that, and hopefully none of you have. Okay. So now, let's talk about how we get into setting goals and kind of how we look at decision making. And if there are some objectivists in the room, you might have a gut reaction to this one here. So we look at profitability and growth as not being worthwhile goals of the organization. Am I in the way there? A little bit? Okay. Any thoughts on that? You can call shenanigans on me at any time. No thoughts there? Okay.
But you were bragging about how many trillion tons of tomato paste you're making.
That's true. That's true. Now, is that...
I said you think growth and big names and so forth are an index of success.
Certainly they're traits of healthy organizations. I would say so, especially in a commercial venture.
So if I told you I had a tomato factory that made 10 pounds, you'd look down on me or think that was failing?
Not necessarily.
All right, then it's not a trait.
Profitability, though, generally in a commercial enterprise, if you're not profitable, at some point, it's no longer worth the effort to continue.
Covering costs.
At least, right? Hopefully, you're at least breaking even. Are there better ways to allocate that capital if there's not at least something of a return?
Pay your capital.
Right, right. So we look at profitability and growth as being the result of achieving our mission and achieving excellence. So, and when I say that these are not worthwhile goals, generally what that means is we're not adhering to specific profitability targets or growth goals. That might seem like a very nuanced distinction, but in my mind it seems pretty fundamental that we're going to try and measure our success by different means. And a lot of that has...
You should say profitability at any cost is not the worthwhile goal.
Sure, maybe that's a better way. That would be a better way of putting it. Because yeah, at any cost implies that they're...
Yes, if you have to do the devil, so to speak, in order to make a profit or sell a lot of products to prospective customers, stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, for business and my goal is profit. What's wrong with that?
Sure. No, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm trying to demonstrate how it is that.
Any cost is not the worthwhile goal.
Sure. Because what does that then set up if you've got kind of artificial targets that you're wanting to hit? Does that then give you an incentive about executives who have quarterly bonuses? Maybe it creates the incentive to fudge the numbers a little bit or to cheat, or to maybe just detach yourself from the reality and say that you're doing better than you really are. So essentially, it's the difference between... Yes, Butler.
In support of what you're discussing here, I've always regarded profit as being a consequence of doing something else well, not as being the purpose. There's a very interesting history on the early turnpikes in America. And the turnpike companies were privately owned companies that built roads from point X to point Y. And these were financed privately by voluntary subscriptions. And they almost always lost money. And people continued to invest in them knowing that they're going to lose money. Meaning there's something else or some other goals or some other purposes.
Right. Okay. So kind of how this manifests in the organization is we don't have specific profit goals. We don't have assigned budgets that we adhere to. Instead, this is kind of what we're looking to hit. Now, just as self-management is and the Morningstar Company are a group of human beings that are coming together, and so self-management can never by definition be perfect, since we're going to have conflict if you ever get more than 2 people in the same room together. We're never going to hit perfection, but this, in our minds, is the only rational measure of our effectiveness. And so that's going to be different depending on what your goal is in the organization. One of the tools that we have, and this is some of our jargon. Yes?
Are you going to define perfection?
I'll give you an example in just a second. So we use the term stepping stones to define kind of our, what perfection might look like in any particular role. We're very obsessive about measuring our progress and our activities. And we try and feed that back as close to real time as we can to individual colleagues. And we're looking for this continuous improvement mindset. That's something that we look for when we get into recruitment and hiring, and it's something that we try and promote within the organization. So for an example of perfection, if you're a salesperson, if you're out selling the product, what's perfection look like? 100% market share? Does that sound reasonable?
More sales, increased sales.
Sure, but at what point do we hit perfection?
Well, I think it depends on the profession, and every profession will be defined differently.
Sure, absolutely. So if you're...
There would be no patient guides, which is impossible, but it nevertheless should be tried.
Right.
For me as an interpreter, this interpretation as close to the written as possible, which is also not possible.
So no mistakes in your translations, and all of the business.
I don't go into professional detail.
Okay. So we have a lot of mechanics that maintain the equipment in our factories. So what's perfection in that environment? Is it maintenance costs of 0? Now again, we don't want to delude ourselves. We could spend nothing on maintenance every year, right? But our operation would grind to a halt at some point. So the point, though, it's similar to that quote that's attributed to Vince Lombardi when he first took over as the coach of the Green Bay Packers, and supposedly he came in and told the entire team, gentlemen, we are going to relentlessly pursue perfection, knowing that we will never achieve it, but along the way we may catch excellence. And so if we never hit perfection, but we maintain excellence in what we do, that to us is success. So now we will chat a little bit about another aspect of our philosophy, which is total responsibility. Again, this is probably very basic material for Libertopians. And we ask everyone to take total responsibility for the operation. That means getting involved in areas outside of their particular sphere of expertise and work at times. And this kind of mirrors our personal life. Once again, the things that hold true in our personal life apply in our commercial and professional life as well. So if you were to go home, you're to come home late, your spouse has not fed or bathed the kids in 3 days, something like that, you don't get to say at that point, well, you know what, that's really not my job, we have an agreement, so why don't you guys just go ahead and go to bed, and we'll talk to Mom about it later. You would need to feed and bathe them, and then maybe talk with your spouse after the fact. Or if through your negligence you've damaged somebody else's property. In a sane world, you owe them restitution. Now you might mitigate that through insurance coverage or something like that. Or, these days we just socialize the consequences of bad behavior in society, right? But again, in a sane world, that restitution is owed. So what does that mean? Within the self-managed environment, it sounds like, from what I've described so far, that we don't have any managers. But the reality is that everyone is a manager. Everyone is expected to perform the tasks of management. And these here, planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling, you might take a few of those off, you might add a few more, but would you agree that these are traditionally managerial functions? So we're taking these functions, and rather than investing just a few individuals with these, we're pushing them down to everybody. So a quick example, since I do get involved in some recruitment on staffing. Now, anyone might identify a need, a staffing need within the enterprise. As a self-managed colleague, they're empowered to go out and find somebody to staff that role. Now, they could do that by themselves in the vacuum, but most likely they're going to get a lot of people involved who are going to be working directly with that person. And in the past, it used to be that all of the year-round colleagues would get together and discuss a prospective candidate. They would all meet with him or her before they came aboard. We're a little too large for that to be practical now, but the spirit of that attitude is still there. So 10 or 12 rounds of interviews, not uncommon within our organization. Meeting somewhere between 10 and 20 people is not uncommon. As I mentioned earlier, no one has the authority to fire. And so when we do occasionally have to separate from somebody, it is their immediate colleagues that come to them, and if they can't resolve whatever the conflict is, they ask them to leave the organization. We don't have a lot of turnover within the group, and so as a result, we have a lot of close working relationships. It's not a comfortable thing. So we get a lot of people involved in the staffing area. And the nice thing about doing recruitment in Morningstar is that everyone is very engaged, because this is an expectation that we have of everyone, is that they're going to be involved in all of these management functions. So what does that look like? So as a result, all the management functions push down. Nobody has executive authority over anybody else. We don't have a formal hierarchy. That's not to say that one does not exist. It's spontaneous order. It's an emergent hierarchy. And it can shift from time to time. It can depend a great deal on the particular project. When we refer to social capital, that refers not only to somebody's particular subject matter expertise that they might have, that they might bring to the table. It can refer to their ability and their desire to drive forward an initiative or something that's going to provide additional value. It can refer to just their overall persuasiveness and getting people on their side. We tend to have a lot of hard driving personalities within Morningstar, but it has to be tempered a little bit by a certain level of conscientiousness, because again, since the relationships are voluntary, nobody has to work with you if they don't want to. Let's see. So if you're going to accept total responsibility, what has to balance that out? You need total freedom. If we're going to ask you to be responsible for the entire enterprise, you have to have a tremendous amount of freedom as well. And so the way that this manifests in the organization is that everyone within the operation has the right to acquire the resources they need to accomplish their mission. We don't have a purchasing department, and there is no dollar limit on acquiring resources. Now, we've never run into it, but if somebody were to go out and just make $1 million purchasing decision without consulting anyone else, all of his or her colleagues would have a few questions for that person. And we'd like to think that somebody that would exercise such poor judgment wouldn't even end up being hired by the Morningstar company. But so this is what, in our mind, kind of helps balance out or what is necessary for that total responsibility aspect. Freedom to get involved anywhere in the operation is also integral to what we do. A quick example that I'd give you, we're in food production, so we have to keep things, there's a certain level of sanitary operations that we want to run. If I'm going into the plant, I have to put on a hairnet, I have to put on a beard net. There are also concerns about people, say, smoking cigarettes too closely to the production area. Now our QA and QC colleagues are very focused, they're very attuned to anybody who might be violating that. But anybody else, if they see that and they understand that somebody might be violating our good manufacturing practices, is expected to call the person out on it. And so it's not unusual to see an engineer or somebody working at the sorting line to call somebody out on something that might be either an unsafe practice or an unsanitary practice. So at the end of the day, we kind of see this as a competitive advantage. We certainly wouldn't call this a libertarian style of management, although it's definitely based on libertarian philosophy. But there are plenty of examples of efficient operations that are in very much a command and control hierarchy. This is how we would prefer to do business. This is how we prefer to associate. And we think that, that this is a strategic advantage that we have. So people tend to be more engaged when they feel like they have a measure of control. And so that engagement, that long-term happiness is really what we're trying to promote through self-management. This is the closest thing we have to an org chart. We put this together a few years ago with the help of some researchers over at UC Davis, which is kind of right in our backyard. Each of the dots represents an individual colleague. The different colors are different parts of the operation. And the lines represent commitments that they've made to one another as far as a customer-supplier relationship, which is kind of how we look at all of our relationships in the organization.
Where are you?
You know, this is probably, you probably can't see it. I'm probably down here off of. No, I would say this was actually made before I came on board the organization in 2008. So I am actually probably not reflected on here. But I have probably seven customer-supplier relationships with other individuals in the organization. So I would probably be maybe average here, kind of right in somewhere in there. And then one final slide, if you have some interest in delving a little deeper, because I know I've been painting with a very broad brush today. There's a lot of different layers that we can go into. We have our colleague principles, a lot of our practices, our colleague guidelines, and our conflict resolution practices, all posted on our website. You can go and take a look at those. And then the SelfManagement Institute has not only some of those things, we have a tremendous number of videos that are posted there from some of the seminars and symposia that we've hosted over the years. And then quite a few different white papers and links to other articles that get us thinking and that we pass on to everybody else. So we have should have at least, I guess, about 10 minutes for questions, and I'll try and take as many as I can. All right.
Me first?
Yeah, please.
The reason I didn't know the yield sign is I ignored them, but a couple questions. You said about 2,100 employees that are seasonal, correct? Do they also have to ascribe to all these things that you?
Yes.
Okay, and the second question would be, from a practical standpoint, you said if let's say somebody needs a tool, okay, regardless of cost, how do they actually do that? Who do they talk to? How do they get the money to do it? Just mechanically, how is it done? Just curious.
Sure. So if there's a case where an invoice is going to show up, the invoice gets paid. If they need to go out and actually have a check cut ahead of time, there are certain people that have the check signing authority. They don't have the power to tell somebody that they can't. It's probably impractical to have every single person on the checking account, right? So they would go and talk to the people that would need it. I've had to do that recently. I have a company credit card, but recently when we were doing some film screenings for a side project, I needed cash to pay our participants, and so I would go and I would ask somebody to cut a check for me, and at no point did they ask what it was for or why. They simply did. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. You were next, I
He has
think.
a question about salaries. Who decides if there's no manager, whether someone gets paid, when they get a raise, not a raise?
That's a very good question. Yeah, so we have a process for that, and once again, it is still in the process of being refined. I hope I didn't sell this to you as being a completely closed loop and perfected system. But at each of our locations, we have what we call a compensation committee. People are asked, or sometimes they volunteer to serve on the committee. and an individual colleague can make recommendations as to who has. I've had people recommend me before, and I fortunately sidestepped it a little bit. But the committees will get together, and everyone. Well, let's see. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So we have an end-of-the-year review process that we call the 360 review, and that's composed of not only a self-evaluation, but all of your, rather than your supervisor doing that, all of your colleagues that you have agreements with are going to evaluate your performance throughout the year. And then you're going to put something together as well that talks about your progress towards, on your stepping stones towards continuous improvement and achieving perfection. And thank you. And then the compensation committees will get together and they will discuss them. And if need be, they will call shenanigans on somebody if they think that they're overstating what it is that they're asking for. And that's generally where increases in compensation, raises, are asked for. And so it's much more than just a person asking another person for a raise. There's a lot more to it than that, and I've got about 2 minutes left. Will that do? Okay.
The gray area, very beginning of the talk.
Lots of those.
Not initiating forms. Moment it isn't really not initiating forms. And it's not who initiating forms. Suppose I have huge property somewhere that I inherited from the grandparents. And it's somewhere far away and they don't even visit. How this woman starts living there. If I come and ask her to leave, she refuses, and then I use force to keep her out. Who is initiating force against who?
Well, land claims are maybe a little bit beyond the scope of this particular talk, but I would say, has she materially harmed you? Perhaps not. Has she violated your property rights? I would say yes. But that particular situation, we're not likely to run up against in the tomato processing business. But it's a worthwhile one.
And what if a homeless guy sneaked into a plant at night and made himself comfortable in the corner, and in the morning he refuses to leave?
Well, then we'd probably have to remove him, right? But in that, I would say that he did, since we do have security personnel around our factories for precisely that reason, because they are vast. So I would say that he is the one who has initiated it at that point.
Okay, a bit is different. Suppose you hire somebody through your 10 interview process, and everybody thought that he's a good guy, but we not so. And you all agree that he needs to leave, and he refuses to leave.
Well, there's a process for that too, and it gradually will go through several different meetings with increasingly large panels of colleagues to assist in the decision-making process there. If need be, the owner of the company will get involved, and he looks at his role primarily as making sure that somebody isn't being railroaded out of the organization. But ultimately, if he refuses to leave, and everyone else agrees that he will, at some point, his paycheck will be cut off, right? So,
If this time just puts a handle in property in the company, they will physically leave.
well, I tell you what, let's catch that one. How are we doing on time? Okay. No time left. Okay. I'll be happy to grab any additional questions just right after we wrap up. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you take a little bit closer look at what we've got going on at Morningstar. Thank you.